Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. Happy holidays to you all. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hi.
I know Jennifer was waiting for an adjective. She was waiting for an adjective, but we got to keep it fresh.
It's so funny. I just realized I hold my breath when you introduced it. I was just waiting to see what was going to drop. So thank you for just making it simple. So hello, everybody. As we get into the full holiday swing, this is the very, very busy time here in Southeast Florida. We get a ton of visitors, Art Basel, etc. But we did want to kind of set everybody up with a quick rerun of 2024, kind of what we're looking forward to in 2025. A lot of unknowns have settled down a bit. We always talk about how buyers, sellers, people in general hate change and want a certain degree of stability before making big decisions. And 2024 was a year full of uncertainty. We had massive rate hikes the year before, so people were waiting for them to drop. Inflation didn't drop as fast as everybody had hoped, so therefore we didn't have huge interest rate cuts either, and we had a presidential election, so there was a lot of uncertainty in the market, which made for opportunities but a lot less trades and deals happening. So we thought we would do a quick rundown. In November, You went to NAR's National Convention, and I know you are the commercial Federal Policy Chair or Commercial Alliance Chair for next year?
Policy.
Okay, Commercial Federal Policy Chair. So I'd like you to go a little bit into that, what that role is at NAR, and then some of the stuff you discussed.
No, absolutely. And, there was a lot of discussion. And, part of the things that we always like to do in our podcast is we want to kind of bring you behind the curtains and just bring that conference experience to you. There was, as you could imagine, this conference happened, right after the election.
Literally the day after.
Literally the day after. And so, it was on everybody's mind, right, as to what it means for commercial real estate, what it means for real estate, what it means for our economy. And so that was a big part of the conversation. There's a variety of committees at National Association of Realtors for commercial. They all fall under the umbrella of the overall commercial committee. And one of the committees is the Commercial Federal Policy Committee. What we do there is we have members from all around the country, experts in their field, who discuss any issues that are affecting the commercial real estate market, that are affecting their clients, that are affecting brokers, right? And we look for where there are advocacy solutions to those issues or things that are coming down the pipe that might affect, right, new legislation that is being introduced in Congress or in the, either in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, changes to tax law that directly affect us. And, a big part of what this organization has done over the years is protecting things like the 1031 like-kind exchange, which always seems to be under the gun, because the reality is that many of the staffers who do the research for tax policy and who work with the senators and who work with members of the House of Representatives, they don't have an understanding of what that is and what is the real value to the economy of having the 1031 exchange. So a lot of what we do is, go through that. So I'll give you basically a report on the committee because, it was extremely interesting. We had a presentation from Evan Lydiard, who is the NAR Director of Federal Tax Policy. So it really is a wonderful thing to have him. He is incredibly bright and really understands the ins and outs and the inner workings of tax policy at a federal, state, and local level. We obviously had a conversation about the tax outlook in 2025. One of the things that has been in the discussion for us has been that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provision was set to expire at the end of 2025. So the expectation is that this is going to be very much part of the conversation in regards to extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and most likely there's going to be some revisions to the act. He explained that even though it looked at that time, right, that the president would have control of the House and the Senate, that still was up for grabs because it was the day after the election. Now we have more clarity. But he did explain that even having that control, because you need 60 votes in the Senate, that it was still going to be a lot of heavy lifting, right, to get those things done. Another part of the discussion had to do with improving on these quality opportunity zones. As you know, this is something that came up in President Trump's, first term in office, and there is a sense that even though the program had some incredible ideas, that the way that the program was doled out and the way that the investments were made in these opportunity zones and the limitations in time and, getting everybody to create an opportunity zone fund and then be able to actually deploy it, that it hasn't really worked out the way that it was intended. So that's going to be another part of, I think, conversations that we're going to have with members of Congress, right? And it's basically how to improve it. That was a big part of the conversation. We also did basically like a survey of all of the members of the committee to get a sense of where, sort of like what is their consumer sentiment from the perspective of a commercial broker in commercial real estate. And, there was discussion about commercial lending, development growth. And look, one thing that you and I have discussed in this podcast, and I think has been a big part of the discussion, is it seems that there has been this discussion about office and the conversion of office into multifamily or, apartment condos, into housing. And the conversations, it feels to me like we've had them in every conference, right? Mm-hmm. But the issue is that when you speak to developers, the way you build an office building and the way you build housing is so different that the cost is, almost prohibitive. There'll probably be some projects that do go through a conversion, but those are going to be few and far in between unless there is an incredible incentive from a tax perspective that will really make the numbers pencil out. And so even though that seems to be the discussion that we have every single time we get together, it feels like for the last 2 years, that has been something that it doesn't feel as though there are enough tools in the tool shed to be able to make that work.
Right. And I think a lot of it also has to do, there's a lot of discussion now that things have settled down a bit too, wondering, so many of these older office buildings, especially around Virginia and DC, are leased out to government, right? And now with President Trump coming in, the question is there going to be a callback to office of government employees, or are they just going to go in there and say, we're getting rid of all this office space, right? It's obsolete. It's expensive. People don't want to go into work. Can we be more efficient with the use of real estate? And in those cases, I think we're starting to see, especially in certain markets, that older buildings that are obsolete, it's just cheaper to tear them down and start from scratch than it is to try to do a retrofit of a building.
However, one of the things that I found out, and it's one of the stats that I want to share with you all, is we also have a commercial research committee. And in the research committee, we basically direct the research department at NAR, led by Chief Economist of NAR, Lawrence Yoon, is to say, okay, we want research on these things. And one of the presentations that we heard was about office attendance. This is kind of an important thing because since 2020, for the last 4 years, what we have seen an increase year over year of office attendance. right? And so it's important to understand the trending is that people are coming back to the office, maybe not in the numbers that they were before, but look at these numbers. In 2020, the office attendance overall, of course, the year of COVID, was 14%. The following year, it went up to 29%. Then in 2022, you're at 44%. 21, you're over 50%, 58%, and actually 54%. In 2024, it is 62%. The expectation is that we'll be closer to 70% by the time we get to the end of 2025, right? And so part of this discussion about what do we do with the office is understanding that there are certain things that haven't changed. There has been a move to quality. People want to go from B to A, from C to B, right? So that's going to be an important component of all of this. But people are going back into the office. The data does show it. Now, what we have found out, I think more anecdotally than what we saw in the numbers, because they didn't have that data, because we did ask them, well, how many days are they in the office? What are you counting? Right. So if you're in the office over 50% of the week, you're counting. Right. And so the reality is that you and I both know people that have companies where they have over 100 employees, and right now they're doing a hybrid, right? They're doing 3 days in the office, and then there are 2 days that are optional. Right. Some people show up on Friday and Monday, but in reality, Tuesday to Thursday is when they have the largest density. Right. So the bulk of the meetings happen in the middle of the week.
Correct. That's why they're talking about, like, the word now is hoteling, right? Where they're managing their space more like a hotel. Like, okay, we know these people come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday. These people come in Tuesday, Thursday. So they need less space, but they need a better schedule. And the spaces become more generic, where anyone can come in and plug in.
There's an accounting firm in Coconut Grove. They have two full floors. They actually did the build out during the pandemic, and what is interesting to your point about hoteling is that there's a bunch of meeting rooms all over the place, right? And then they have these basically these mini pads in the front of the room. You can reserve any room, right? And it'll tell you when, if it's red, it's occupied. If it's green, you can go ahead and reserve. It'll tell you what times they're reserved. And so people just come in and out, and they do whatever they need. They have, the big bullpen area, of course, great areas to have lunch, all those things, all of the things that you would find and that you would want to have if you're working long hours, right? But there is a lot of hoteling in the space, right? And and they even had to tell some employees, hey, listen, from this point on, this is a way to incentivize you to come back, right? They didn't want to tell their employees, you got to be here, but they basically said, look, you can no longer have a private office if you're not here at least 3 times a week, Right. And of course, they have all of the software and the equipment to be able to ascertain who's there and who's using and who's not using the office. So yeah, I like that the idea of hoteling, and
also more suburban space, right? Because people aren't as willing to do a 2-hour commute as they might have before, or an hour and a half. They want to be closer, especially if they're spending more time working from a home office as well. They want to have their office close by so they can pop in for a couple of hours or do a hybrid even within a day for whatever, childcare or whatever. So
I think next year a big part of the heavy lift for our committee is going to be really tax legislation and tax law. We created a work group with the taxation committee, the Federal Taxation Committee, to look at and review federal legislation and regulatory tax policies that impact commercial development, redevelopment, adaptive reuse. So I think that's going to be a big part of where our efforts are going to be in 2025 and 2026, since we always look, a year ahead. But it's certainly going to be a busy year. And part of it is, and this is a very unfortunate thing about our state of affairs in our country, is that election years usually there's not a lot of work getting done, which really sucks for the American public, because the reality is that, that means 1 out of every 4 years things kind of grind to a halt, and that's not good.
It's not
because
very
there's
efficient.
a lot of it's not efficient, and there's a lot of things to do, and there's a lot of value there. I will tell you that there are some ongoing commercial issues for 2025, including the Safe Banking Act and the waters of the of the U.S. rule. So there's a lot of little dynamics there, and great thing about having this podcast is we could bring that information to you, as it comes up.
As it happens. And some of what we're hearing overall is the uncertainty going into 2025 is, have we nipped inflation? We know it's slowed, but are some of these policies, are some of the pent-up demand that had been waiting to find out what the Fed's going to do, who was going to be in office and who was going to control Congress? Now, is that going to spur growth and therefore some of the inflationary issues that affected us before, if there are tariffs put in place, all that kind of stuff?
What's interesting is that I think the overall feeling in the halls of these conferences is that even though, yes, there is uncertainty about those items, we understand that those items are ruled by economic forces. So there's a little bit more of understanding of, if it goes one way or the other, how it's going to trigger other things. But the level of uncertainty that you have when you don't know, when you're in the middle of a presidential election year, is another ball of beeswax, right? Because it has to do with who is going to make decisions, how are they going to approach it. It's vastly different. It doesn't, to a degree, it's more about having the certainty of who you're going to be talking to and how they are going to be viewing things is more important than anything. And so I think everybody felt that having the certainty allows us to kind of get back to work.
Correct. The only thing is that there's still this, we don't think the rates are going to be coming down as fast.
Correct.
And as low as predicted in 2023. It didn't happen in 2024 for sure. I think people were predicting 6 to 7 drops and that the rates would be somewhere down around 5%. And we've gotten nowhere close. We had 150%, 125%. And that was it, right? Those were the only two. So we had two drops, and now I think we're probably going to be in a holding pattern for a while, just to see after the holiday season. I know we had a record year for sales for Black Friday. Everything seems busy, but we'll have to see what the numbers show after the first of the year.
Listen, we went from complaining about the cost of eggs to having the largest sales day on Black Friday in history. So, what's going on, guys?
I know. Everyone's just whatever. But I think to your point, things did pick up. We were telling our sellers that hadn't seen activity for a while, especially the month of October and November was extremely slow. There wasn't even any tire kicking on leases or anything like that. And literally the week after the election, the phone started ringing, showings started happening, LOIs started coming in. So we did get that. It was funny because I did read a couple of posts where people were saying, all of that happened, but sellers and buyers are still unrealistic and very far apart. But deals are getting done. We know a bunch of people who have been successfully negotiating purchases, leases, etc. So, if you're in the brokerage or investing, you know what your parameters are, you know what your goals are. So try to drown out the noise. And I think there's a lot of opportunity out on the market, and I think more will be coming on for
Absolutely.
sure.
One of the things that is always a highlight, I think, for everybody who goes to this conference is to listen to Lawrence Yun. And he does 2 presentations. He does basically a full economic forecast and a residential real estate specific presentation. And then he does, our commercial specific, economic presentation. And I thought that was, really good. So if you don't mind, I'll kind of go through it. And we'll start with part of the uncertainty that you're talking about is what is going to happen with the amount of commercial real estate loans that are coming due and that they're set to readjust, right, in 2024. And therefore, we have just short in this year, in 2025, there's going to be about $1 billion worth of commercial real estate loans that are coming due. And so that obviously is a concern, and it puts, pressure. One of the things that Lawrence Jones discussed was that, it seems that the banks have done a really good job of kind of kicking the can down the road and basically elongating this. And to a degree that has worked. But for how long can they do this? A lot of the loans that we're discussing are commercial, mortgage-backed securities. So, obviously there's only so much that you can do with a product like that. And so that really is the biggest concern. And so then you turn into looking at what are the economic realities and how all of the different asset sectors are going to perform, because obviously what people are really concerned with in commercial real estate loan securities, I think it's more on the office side than anything else, just because of the the realities of the high vacancy and where we are compared to if you have a loan coming due in an industrial portfolio or multifamily portfolio, right? And so, I think that they realized that there was a recovery in commercial property prices, which will make refinancing easier. He did speak a little bit about the Fed funds rate cut, but really, I think the reality is that it's everything that you mentioned. We're kind of going to coast on where things are, but they're not going to get lower as far as rates, right away. It might look very different in the second half of 2025 than in the first half of 2025. But I think a lot of this is, we're still adjusting. He was very bullish on the controlling of the consumer price inflation. He felt that even though in months past, he's been critical of some of the decisions of the Fed. And I don't know if critical is the word, but maybe more concerned about how those policies are affecting the overall economy. But it does seem right now that the Fed may have pulled a rabbit out of a hat in kind of giving us a soft landing. But here are basically the highlights here. Upcoming rent growth, they feel we're still going to have rent growth in a lot of asset classes, but it'll be calmer. Future consumer price index is going to be calmer. So again, inflationary pressures the concern is still going to be there, but it seems that we're not going to have these wild fluctuations. He does expect a cut rate of about 6 or 8 rounds, right, over next year, but they're probably going to be small, and they're probably going to be determined based on, to your point, if we have more certainty about inflation, being under control. And he does expect a future rent growth in the next 2 to 3 years. So milder this year, but in the next 2 to 3 years, we should have that issue.
Well, go back to the rent growth, because I think that's interesting. There were a couple of articles last week that discussed Florida in general and Miami specifically. And one of the rent growth issues was that Miami industrial rents went up the highest at a time when we were getting significant delivery. We were up 11% year over year. That came from Globist. And then also, I had done a post on LinkedIn that Florida in general is going to need a lot more retail, because we're just not building it fast enough for the amount of migration that we're getting into the state. And, they usually say retail follows rooftops, but retail hasn't been able to follow rooftops in the last several years just because of the cost of building, the lack of land, et cetera. Right. So. Yeah.
No, and it's really interesting. You and I discussed, and we saw a presentation in C5, and it was discussed that we were in the demographic and in the jobs market, right? That when you're in commercial real estate, that's where you are. And he discussed that, like, long-term real estate demand comes from jobs, right? And so, right. And he spoke about, the number of net payroll, jobs that have been added, the low unemployment rate. There are a lot of people that are not technically in the labor force, which is accounting for that low vacancy factor. And anybody who's listening knows a lot of people that are in the gig economy. They're doing DoorDash, Uber Eats, so it's definitely changed some of that dynamic. But he said, like in the state of Florida, if you look at the state of Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Idaho, you've had double-digit increases in job growth since pre-COVID. So we have a record high payroll employment. And look, part of what we do here is real estate is very local. So we could look at the economy as a whole, and of course it does have an effect, but you have to look at your own local market, right? And what is happening there. So he highlighted a lot of paying jobs. For example, state of Arizona, over 1 million jobs since 2000. But then Michigan, you have 150,000 less jobs since 2000. So these things is really interesting. Spoke about, we're starting to see some real data about what they call reshoring or inshoring, manufacturing facilities coming back to the U.S. That has been, a really interesting dynamic. And overall, this was his forecast for the commercial market. We're going to experience GDP growth, boost in demand. He says we're going to have more leasing. There's going to be more positive net absorption, especially in asset classes, to your point, Jennifer, about retail, where we're going to see that happening. Lower vacancy rates, improvements in rent, but it's going to be manageable. It's not going to be these wild 10, 15, 20% things that we saw during COVID. And there's going to be a loosening of the credit tightness that we have experienced, especially over the last year. The supply picture was mixed, right? He says that a lot of people are concerned that we're overdeveloping in industrial and multifamily, but he feels that is only going to be a temporary thing because the market will absorb it. But he fears that we're going to have a permanent oversupply in office, right? So that has to be addressed. And restrained supply in retail and hotel. Now, hotel is really interesting, right? We've been hearing about this, that the hotel and hospitality industry, but most importantly hotels, banks are having a hard time touching hotels, even though they are doing extremely well. I mean, their numbers are crazy. Banks are very concerned about what happened in COVID and whether they really want to invest heavily in hotels, even though they're performing extremely well. He gives this breakdown about where things are in cap rate when it comes to multifamily retail. We'll post a link for people to be able to go through it, in our show notes, and so that way you can see it. But it's really interesting when you get to office and when you look at vacancy rates. Miami is still number one, because if you're going to work in an office environment, why not do it in Miami? And again, the hotel numbers are just, they're just doing amazing. So we'll add that to it. I think overall, it was a really energetic feel from everyone who came in. There was a lot of lively discussion about everything that is happening around the commercial real estate sector. I saw a lot of positivity as well, all throughout, and it was great to be in those rooms. The discussions were meaty. They weren't superficial. We were having real conversations about things that make sense and a lot of the things that make no sense.
Well, and I just want to point out, and the reason for doing these summaries is because, look, there's always uncertainty. I don't care how great the economy is doing and everything. There's always something that's uncertain, right? When the economy is doing great, it's like, well, when is it going to drop? Am I buying at the height of the market? Am I leasing at the height of the market? And I just want to point out that we always believe that when there is a lot of uncertainty, or when things are just starting to ramp up because now there is certainty, there's a window of opportunity if you know where to look, if you have set parameters as to what you're looking for, whether it's in terms of business or brokerage, or who you're going to go after as potential tenants or investors, or if you're an investor yourself, there are pockets of opportunity. So, if you want to be lucky, be prepared so that when those opportunities come along, you're ready.
That's a great line. If you want to be lucky, be prepared. So do you have a stat of the day? Because I don't have a stat of the day, but I did want to share something that I thought was cool that I heard in one of the presentations.
Share away.
The National Association of Realtors has this Distinguished Service Award, and it's for people, they've been involved, engaged, they have been giving back to the industry for, 30, 40 years of their life. And they always get a chance to, those that are recipients of the award, always get to say a couple words. And I thought this was a really good one. And I'm sorry that I am not quoting the name of the person, but the idea itself I thought was very powerful. Basically, she broke down 3 lessons that, and I wrote down these 2 lessons. Number 1, be hard on the problem, but not on the person, which I think it's very good. And the other thing is, every once in a while, it's okay to have an unexpressed thought. I thought that was really great. So she was saying, like, when you're in a meeting, it's okay. You don't always, and you know what? We're going to have an entire episode on that idea, because that's something that people never realize. Sometimes when you're in negotiations or you're in sales, you feel the need, especially when you're early in the industry, in your career, to say a lot, to explain away. And sometimes the editing aspect of your, when you self-edit yourself and you let just things be, is sometimes a lot better than to express every single idea that comes to your mind.
So mine is from ICSC, and we don't have the final numbers yet, but consumers are expected to spend $125 billion over the Thanksgiving Day weekend.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with how late Thanksgiving was this year. I think I heard that we have 5 less days to shop for the holidays in December, so it'll be interesting to see. But
that's all.
It goes to show the strength of the American consumer, and it aligns with what all of the sentiment surveys have been showing, which is that consumers are being pickier on what they spend on, but they're still spending.
Yeah, for sure. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Between Two Chairs. Jennifer and I want to again wish you a very happy holidays. I hope you get everything you want. But more importantly, that next year meets you with great health and joy and prosperity. God bless you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.